Good evening, my friends. I hope you're all doing very well. Tonight we're going to be learning the last chapter of the Laws of Blessings. So this is chapter 11 of the Laws of Blessings, and over here the Rambam is going to be discussing the proper way of how to say a blessing. So he begins off by telling us that in general, all blessings, when we say them, we begin with blessing God, blessed are you God, and then we conclude also by saying, blessed are you God, and we complete the blessing. So for instance, in regards to, let's say, the blessings that we recite before the recital of the Shema. So every morning in our daily prayers, or every evening in the daily prayer, we say a blessing before the Shema. We actually make two blessings before the Shema. And we begin by making a blessing. We say, blessed are you God, created light, and so on. And then we say the blessing. And then at the end of that blessing, we say, blessed are you God, the creator of the lights. That's the blessing in the morning. So that's in general the way blessings work. Now, but there are exceptions, and there's actually a lot of exceptions, and that is in regard to a case when you have a blessing that comes continuation after the blessing before it. So in other words, if you have a few blessings one after another, so then you will begin the first one. And then you will begin it by saying, blessed are you God, whatever it is. Then you will complete that blessing by saying, blessed are you God, in whatever context we're talking about. The next blessing that comes in line after that will actually not begin with blessed are you God, or rather just go right into that blessing, because we just completed the blessing before it by saying, blessed are you God. So in other words, we will just rely on that saying for the next blessing. So let's go back to our blessings of the Shema. We said there are two blessings. So in that case, the first blessing we begin by saying, blessed are you God. We say the whole blessing. At the end we again say, blessed are you God, the creator of the luminaries. And then we don't say, blessed are you God again for the second blessing, but rather we just begin by saying how God loves the Jewish people. That's how the second blessing begins. But then at the end of that blessing, we will say, blessed are you God, who has chosen the Jewish people with love. That's how the blessing finishes off. But the second blessing won't begin with saying, blessed are you God. That's one exception. There are other exceptions as well. For instance, blessings that we do on a mitzvah. For instance, let's say we make a blessing of lighting Shabbat candles, or the blessing of putting on tefillin. We just say it's a one blessing that we begin, blessed are you God. Then we say, who has commanded us to put on tefillin, or to light Shabbat candles. Or if we're making a blessing over food, for instance, we say the blessing, blessed are you God, who has given us, who has the creator of the world, who has given us concerning eating food, or whichever food it is, whether it's bread or wine or vegetables, fruits, so on and so forth. So it's just, we only begin with it, but we don't end again by saying, blessed are you God, so on. But so that's an interesting thing to realize in regards to blessings, that there are different types of blessings. Some of them will begin with blessed are you God, and we'll have the whole blessing and we'll finish again with it. Some will begin with it but not end with it. Some will not begin by blessed are you God, but will finish with blessed are you God. So it depends on the circumstance. Something to look out for when you make blessings. Now, the Rambam continues on by saying that there are different types of mitzvot. There are different types of commandments, positive commandments that we do throughout our life. For instance, let's say we spoke about earlier about tefillin, or let's talk about a holiday for a second. Let's say a sukkah, or shaking the lulav, or listening to the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. These type of mitzvot, these types of commandments are commandments that we are commanded to do, and we have to run after them to make sure that we will do them, because we have a full obligation to do them. So let's say it comes to the holiday of Sukkot, we have to make sure that we have a sukkah, we eat in the sukkah. Or comes to Rosh Hashanah, we have to make sure that we listen to the shofar. Now, there are other types of mitzvot that we don't necessarily have to run after them in order to do them. But if we if we come to a circumstance where we come across this mitzvah, so then we have to do it. For instance, there is a mitzvah that you need to put a mezuzah on your house. Now, that doesn't mean that there is a mitzvah to buy a house so that you can put on a mezuzah or to rent a house. Because technically a person is able to live in a tent for their whole life or to live on a boat, and then you don't have to put on a mezuzah and everything's fine. He hasn't transgressed anything. But if a person has a house, now they have to put on a mezuzah. So on with all the other types of mitzvot that fall into that category. Now there's another category, which are the mitzvot where we're commanded by the rabbinic court, where they set certain mitzvot. For instance, Hanukkah, the holiday of Hanukkah, didn't take place at the time of the giving of the Torah of Mount Sinai. It only took place later. And the rabbis said that this holiday of Hanukkah should be instituted as a Jewish holiday, and we should light the Hanukkah candles, and we make a blessing when we light those candles. Or how does that work? So, we say the blessing is, we say, "Blessed are you, God, who has commanded us to light the Hanukkah candles." Now, the only thing is, which comes, the Rambam brings up, and he says, where did God actually command us to light the Hanukkah candles? If you open up the Torah, you look through it, you scroll through the entire 5 books of Moses, you're not going to find anywhere where it tells us to light the Hanukkah candles, because Hanukkah hasn't happened yet, as we mentioned. But it does say in the Torah, in Deuteronomy 17, it says that God commands us that whatever the rabbis tell us to do, we should follow that. So, obviously we're not talking about simple people. We're talking about very great, the rabbinic high court in Jerusalem, in the temple, and they had the authority to be able to say that there should be a certain addition, so to speak, which we should do. For instance, the mitzvah of Hanukkah. So, therefore, God commanded us that we should listen to them. So therefore, we can say this blessing, "Blessed are you, God, who has commanded us," because God has commanded us to listen to their high court. And therefore, we follow this and we do this. And so too also in regard to all the other mitzvot that the rabbis have commanded us. For instance, Purim, to listen to the Megillah, so on and so forth. There is an interesting place where we do not make a blessing, which is in regards to the washing of our hands. The first washing of our hands before a meal, let's say before we eat bread, we do make a blessing. It's from the rabbis, but we wash our hands, we make the blessing, al natilat yadayim, concerning washing of our hands. Now, at the end of the meal, though, there is a special washing which we do, which is after the end of the meal. It says that we should wash our fingertips, and we don't make a blessing on that, because it was only there instituted just for purposes of danger, that there was certain types of salts that were dangerous, could make someone to lose their eyesight, so therefore they said that they should wash their hands at the end of the meal, which we do, but we do not make a blessing on it. So it's just an interesting case where there's actually a specific, even though it's a mitzvah that we should do it, we don't actually make a blessing on it. Now, if a person is, doing a certain mitzvah, let's say we are wearing tzitzis, or we're sitting in the sukkah, and we forgot to make a blessing during this time of this commandment, while we're performing this mitzvah. So if we're still doing the mitzvah, so then we are able to just say the blessing right here and now, even though we're in middle. It's not just in the beginning, as we usually, whenever we make a blessing, we do it in the beginning. But if you haven't done it in the beginning, you're able to do it later. But if you already finished this mitzvah, for instance, if a person is doing a ritual slaughtering, and it takes literally just a couple seconds just to do that cut, and they forgot to make the blessing, well, it's too late. They don't make the blessing. And in general, there is no mitzvah that we make a blessing after it is done. Only one case, which is actually quite an interesting case, because they're not able to make a blessing, which is a case of a person who is converting, a convert. A convert is not able to say that God has commanded me to dunk in the mikvah, which is when they make the blessing, because God hasn't commanded them yet, because they still haven't gotten that command, because they're not Jewish. So once the person dunks in the mikvah, now, once they become Jewish, now they're able to make the blessing that God commanded us, the Jewish people, that we should, concerning the idea of dunking in a mikvah, the ritual bath. So it's a very interesting concept. So that's the only place where the Rambam says that we find that a person will make the blessing after the deed has been done. But again, as we said, if a person is still in the middle of doing the deed, doing the mitzvah, they are still able to make the blessing. And another point in regards to blessings is that we make the blessing at the end action of the commandment. For instance, if there are, let's say, a sukkah, right? We have a sukkah, we sit in the hut on Sukkot, so we got to build that hut first, and only then, on the holiday, are we going to be sitting inside it. Or, for instance, a mezuzah. The scribe writes the mezuzah, the scroll, and then we hang it up on the door. So, during the time when the scribe is writing it, or during the time when we are building this hut, this sukkah, we don't make the blessing because we're going to make the blessing at the end, the last action, which is actually the time when we perform the mitzvah, not in the time of the preparation. And then the Rambam says that when we have mitzvot that only come from time to time, for instance, in regards to holidays, shofar, sukkah, lulav, Hanukkah candles, listening to the Megillah on Purim, or other special mitzvot that don't take place very often, so then we can also make a special blessing of Shehecheyanu, where we thank God that He has brought us to this special occasion. So that's the end of this part of the chapter. And now the Rambam goes into a whole another section in this chapter, which is a very interesting idea. And this is a little bit grammarly, something in the Hebrew grammar, where there are two ways we can say a blessing. And I'll explain. When we say a blessing, we say, "Blessed are you, God, who commanded us, who has sanctified us with His commandment, and has commanded us to." So then we can say this in two different ways. We can, let's say we're putting up a mezuzah on our door. So we're putting up the mezuzah on our door. So then we would say, "Who has commanded us to affix a mezuzah?" Because we are now fulfilling a commandment on our house, we're putting up the mezuzah. Now the thing is, sometimes we're going to be saying this blessing, let's say it's someone else's house, but the mitzvah is not our mitzvah because it's not my house. I'm just helping out someone, or for whatever reason they can't say the blessing, I'm saying it for them, but I'm affixing the mezuzah on their doorpost, but it's not the mitzvah, it's not mine because it's not my house, but I'm still saying the blessing. So in that case, you wouldn't say, "Who has commanded us to affix a mezuzah," but rather we would say, "Concerning the affixing of a mezuzah." Alright? So you understand the difference? So there are two ways to define the mitzvah. Either the action that we're doing right now, to affix a mezuzah, or we can say the general concept that God has commanded us concerning the idea of affixing a mezuzah. So that's an interesting thing, and it's going to play itself out in various times and various places. So, for instance, when a person puts on tefillin, or if a person wears tzitzis, we say, "Blessed are you, God, who has commanded us to put on tefillin," because we are now putting on the tefillin. Or we say, "Blessed are you, God," when we light Shabbat candles, who has commanded us to light the candles of Shabbat. But if we're talking about a case where a person is, let's say, a person who is a mohel, someone who does circumcisions, and this mohel is circumcising someone else's child, not his own. So then, the blessing that they would make is, "Blessed are you, God, who has commanded us concerning the mitzvah of circumcision, of Brit Milah." Because, again, this mitzvah is not one of their own. So to also in regards when a person is doing something that is for a person who is doing a mitzvah, where they are supposed to be doing this mitzvah. We have, let's say, to listen to the shofar. But it's not just for you, you're doing it for other people as well. So which way does it go? Because we're doing the mitzvah for ourselves, but there's other people who are also going to be listening to the shofar. So, which one outweighs the other? So the Rambam says that if it's a mitzvah that you have to do, for instance, the shofar. So the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, we have a mitzvah. If we don't have a shofar, we should go and actively try to find one. So it's a mitzvah that we have to actively go and we have an obligation to do it. So then we would say, God who has commanded us to listen to the shofar because we have a mitzvah to listen to the shofar. But if we're talking about a mitzvah that we do not have an obligation to go after and do it, but for instance, there is a mitzvah where let's say there's an interesting mitzvah which the Rambam brings over here, which is in regards to an eruv, which is the boundary of a courtyard that we should be able to carry there on Shabbat. So you don't have to make an eruv. You don't have to make this boundary around the courtyard, only if you want to carry there. So it's going to be for you and for other people who want to carry there. So again, because you don't have an obligation to make an eruv, it's just if you want to carry there, then you have this is the way to do it. So then you would just say the mitzvah concerning the mitzvah of eruv, of putting this boundary around the courtyard. So that's a very interesting idea. And the Rambam finishes off this chapter by saying that there are certain things which are customs. On customs, we do not make a blessing. So there are various customs. There are all different types of customs. But if it's a custom, it's not a mitzvah. We do not make a blessing when we do this custom. This, something which is not specifically a mitzvah. And the bottom line is, and this is the way we finish off this chapter, the Rambam says that in general, if a person is in doubt whether they should make a blessing or not, if they're not sure if they have to do it or not, better don't do it. But if you know that you should do the blessing, so then definitely we should do it. And in general, as many blessings as we can do, it's a very proper thing, as King David says in Psalms, that every day I will bless you. And that is in regards to saying blessings, that we should make many blessings every day. It's a very positive thing, as long as we have the obligation at this point to make the blessing, and it's not a blessing in vain. So that is the chapter, the last chapter of the laws of blessings, and with this we have concluded the 11 chapters of this section of Rambam, and tomorrow we're going to be starting a new section actually the last section of the book of love, which is the book that we're learning right now, the second book of Rambam, but we are nearing the completion of the second book. So all the best for you tonight. We will see you all tomorrow, God willing. Have a very good one in the meantime.